Welcome to Unchained Media Scotland. Richard Gage of Architects and Engineers for 911Truth. How are you?
I'm doing great, David. How are you?
We're doing well. We're doing well. It's a difficult situation right now, but we're pulling through it. We're sticking to the science. You know.
Yeah, always.
So we're going to talk a little bit about where we are with 9/11 and where the whole campaign has come to, and I think maybe we can begin with what happened recently, earlier in the year. It was around about April time. Was it the 15th of April? I think you put in for a correction for the report that the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the United States had produced, and that was a correction on their analysis for why the building number 7 fell in the manner that it did. What can you tell us about the application to correct that and the outcome?
Yeah, and for those who don't know about World Trade Center Building 7, this is a 47-story skyscraper that drops like a rock straight down uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint in under 7 seconds at free fall acceleration. And all this after witnesses hear explosions. So NIST comes out with this theory, this elaborate collapse theory that bears no resemblance to reality. So our attempt with the submittal of a request for correction was to focus on those areas where they are most vulnerable, where the fraud is most obvious. And there's 8 key points there with regard to their specific initiation of collapse theory. So we did that, and they finally got back to us and denied each of our 8 requests. And they used the most superficial, unscientific, and egregious and blatant misrepresentations and non-representations of our actual concerns about these. So we'll be submitting an appeal, which is due on September 27th. And when and we imagine it will produce similar results, we will definitely, at that point, begin a lawsuit.
Okay. Can we go through each of the 8 points that you made and just talk about what you put in, what they said back, and why you believe that's not sufficient?
Yeah. The first one was the fact that in their theory, they propose that fires are pushing this, expanding these long span beams, pushing this girder off of its seat on the particular column number 79. And then the floor 13 falls on 12 and 12 on 10 and so forth. And all of that could not be true for a whole variety of reasons, not the least of which was that these fires were not even on in that area at all for an hour before the collapse of the building at 5:20 in the afternoon. So we focused on column 79. It's built up. It has side plates. So if the girder expanded, as it would have in the very hot temperatures, that column would have gotten stuck by those side plates because it would have first moved in toward the column, and then it would be trapped from being pushed off the bearing seat on that column. So NIST completely ignored this, ignored the temperatures, for instance, that were...
So, do you mind just as far as I remember reading that within this there were these I think called shear studs, and they're like rods of metal which connect to what would have been a poured concrete floor above, and which would mean that again there would be no possibility of a side to side movement at all. Did we get that right?
And that's a whole nother point. The shop drawings show 30 shear studs on this girder, tying it to the concrete slab up above. So there's no possible way that it could have been pushed sideways. Absolutely true. In addition to that, there's issues regarding the thermal expansion of a particular beam, one of these 50-foot long beams. They did not address that. I don't have the details on that right now, but they've also omitted the girder web stiffeners. In their report, they say that, well, we didn't put the web stiffeners in because they're designed to create stop web crippling which is not the issue here. But they would have also kept the flange, the bottom flange of this girder from folding. You see, NIST says that the girder only had to be pushed halfway off of its seat on this column. And they went to elaborate measures to get those long span beams to push the girder off of its seat in the first place, because actually they would have sagged. But in their computer model, they put in all of the heat, about 1400 degrees Fahrenheit, into these beams in a second and a half, forcing them to expand, whereas naturally they would have sagged. They wouldn't even have been able to push this girder at all. But since they do say it did push it halfway off, the flange folds, well, the stiffeners that they omitted from their analysis would have kept those flanges from folding and kept the girder from walking off.
Do you mind if I just how do they justify in their model putting all the heat of the day in 1 second? Because surely that is trying to fix a result.
Yeah,
that would be like fraud on other books. That would be considered some kind of a fraud, would it not?
Yeah, well, this is one of the reasons they don't release all of their computer data. We filed a Freedom of Information Act, which you can do in this country with regard to federal agencies that are committing fraud like this. But they write back and say, well, we can't do that. It might jeopardize public safety if we were to release it. What? Doesn't it jeopardize public safety to withhold this information from the architects and engineers who are tasked with ensuring the public safety? After all, there are many, many buildings, probably hundreds of skyscrapers that are similarly designed to the upper floors of Building 7.
And surely, given this, what has been revealed by their study, all high-rise buildings since that time must be built to a different protocol. They must, has there been changes to the way the buildings are created these days as a result?
Yeah, great question. NIST actually made some structural recommendations.
Okay.
And to the International Conference of Building Officials, but they did not incorporate any of those structural recommendations. They did incorporate some of the fireproofing recommendations, but the structural is what NIST is claiming failed here. And they're calling it a progressive collapse. And that leads to item number D, which is the cascading of floors. They say floor 13 then fell on 12, 12 on 10, and so on for 9 floors, leaving column 79 unbraced, and then it buckles. Well, none of that could have happened, because for floor 13 to fall on 12, it would have required 10 times the amount of dynamic force that floor could have possibly generated. We're talking about 632,000 pounds versus 60,000 pounds. So NIST is just caught with their pants down all over the place.
I would think that if you create that model, you would be able to replicate that. There would be some kind of an experiment where you could show that particular model happening. Has anyone tried to produce something like that? That would be the scientific method, surely. Yeah,
indeed. We have the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, who's embarked on a 4-year, $300,000 finite element analysis study, which the report is now out. You can see it on our website at AE911Truth.org and look at it. It's 132 pages. We recommend that all over the world this be given to structural engineers, because this is the only peer review we've got of NIST's work here. Everything else is an insider vision. It was carefully handed to well-known representatives who I guess they trusted, but we certainly don't. The results of the Halsey study show that in order for this building to fall, well, first of all, it couldn't have collapsed due to fire. Second of all, if it was going to collapse due to the failure of columns 79, 80, and 81, as NIST claims, it would have fallen over. Those columns are on the east side of the building. It's just a no-brainer. A 7th grader can pick this up. It would have fallen over, and Professor Halsey and his team of PhD researchers proved that. And then beyond that, they proved that in order for this building to collapse in the way the videos show, they would have had to have removed all the columns virtually at once in the building. Now, what can do that? There's only one thing that can do that, and that's explosive controlled demolition. And we have the evidence of the explosiveness. We have the evidence of the incendiaries that, in this case, were used. The evidence, which includes extremely hot temperatures not accountable by normal office fires or jet fuel. And remember, this building was not hit by a plane. So we have the evidence in all the previously molten iron microspheres that the USGS finds but can't explain in all the World Trade Center dust, up to 4 tons of that material. So the evidence, including the evidence for nanothermite chips found in all the World Trade Center dust samples sent to an international team of 8 scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, they find very sophisticated nanoparticles of iron oxide and aluminum powder, very carefully engineered. Now, that is example of unignited residue. The ignited residue is the previous molten iron spheres, and none of this was found or even looked for by NIST. First they claimed, well, that couldn't have been there. We would have found it. And then they admitted they never looked for it.
So the red-grey chips, I mean, people say that that was paint. So what can you tell us about the red-grey chips? How many have we got, and who's been looking at them, and what do they see?
Yes, there's 4 tons of this material in the World Trade Center dust, 8 samples independently collected and sent to this team that I mentioned. The paper is peer-reviewed in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal. It is not contested. Since 2009, nobody submitted a paper saying, hey, that can't be true because of X, Y, Z. It's just kind of been ignored and hushed. And like the Halsey study, swept under the rug by the media. This is a set of evidence and documentation that does not want to be dealt with by the mainstream media or by our government. Nevertheless, we go every year to our elected representatives and present them these latest studies and the petition signed by 3,000 now architects and engineers demanding a new investigation. We're going to England with the work of Matt Campbell. His brother Jeff died in the tower. The pieces of his body were distributed all over the place. They could only find a piece of his skull and his mandible. This is extreme evidence in and of itself of explosive demolition. So the evidence that we just touched on today is only a small fraction of that which we'll be giving to the barrister in London at Doughty Street Chambers. This is for a new inquest, and so the threshold is very low. So we're currently trying to raise these funds for Matt Campbell and his family so Jeff can get this new inquest. So we hope people will support us at AE911Truth.org. We're almost there. We're 3/4 of the way there for his legal expenses. Okay.
Now, it seems to me quite, when something happens like this, and we're talking here in like a big city, New York, it's a density of population. I mean, I know people were moved away from the area, but we've got people who say that they witnessed the explosions, they witnessed flashes, they witnessed sonic booms, they felt shockwaves that came through their body. Where are these witnesses? I mean, I remember hearing people from news clips. I know that there's a Kevin McPadden, for example, has spoken in other documentaries. Where are these people? Are they coming back? Are they retelling their stories? Are they involved in this kind of legal action? Are they bearing witness?
Well, we certainly have their video statements, and that's powerful enough. Some of them are going to be included as expert witnesses for this inquest in England, but there's 200 of them on video. We have them in our documentary, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, in which we've also assembled 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out this evidence. But this explosive testimony is incredible because they're hearing explosions before the tower came down. Most of them are describing this very specifically, and they're seeing flashes of light before the towers begin their collapse. So this is not the sounds, as NIST claims, of one floor hitting another as the tower is coming down. No, below the tower coming down, after it begins to come down, we have squibs or isolated explosive ejections 20, 40, 60 stories down below the point of jet plane impacts. These can't be produced by anything but explosives. And in fact, the scientific evidence shows in the molten iron pouring out of the South Tower, for instance, minutes prior to its collapse, is direct evidence of the use of thermite, an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. It's much more effective than C4 or RDX, traditional high-energy explosives that are used typically to bring down tall buildings and controlled demolitions.
I mean, some people say that that's aluminium because the fuselage of the aircraft was made largely of aluminium materials, and that was the intense heat in that point, and then the aluminium fell downwards with gravity and started to spill through, gaps in the walls where it was broken, etc. I mean, could that be aluminium that we saw there from the fuselage of the plane?
Well, aluminum doesn't glow bright yellow and white hot in daylight temperatures like iron does. Molten iron is the byproduct of thermate, so aluminum would be silvery in daylight conditions. So it's clearly not aluminum. And the tests show all this molten material to be molten iron. Well, where does molten iron come from? We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years, pure elemental iron. And yet that's what is the meteorites, they call them, as they do tests, chemical tests, and the slag from the ends of the beams and the iron microspheres are iron. They're not steel, they're not aluminum. The melting point of iron is 2,800 degrees. Even jet fuel only burns less than half of those temperatures. So the official narrative can't possibly explain the voluminous body of evidence for extreme temperatures, which we cover in our webinar, by the way, which is called Part 3, 9/11, An Architect's Guide, Part 3, the Twin Towers in Extreme Heat.
And I think you discussed the how we know about the extreme heat, because some people say no, these are, there's no evidence. Sometimes people say there's no evidence, but we've actually got NASA thermal satellite imagery, which is verified, which shows the temperatures on the surface of the rubble pile. We've got
it shows temperatures hotter than the hottest office fires can even get, and that's on the surface of these three piles, and so there's no fire on the surface. So what are they measuring? They're measuring something much hotter deep down in the piles that is radiating up and cooling off by the time that it gets to the surface. In fact, FEMA documented very carefully a metallurgical examination on the steel in their 2002 Building Performance Assessment Report. In Appendix C, they document hot temperature corrosion attack on the steel with molten iron and sulfur invading the grain boundaries of the steel. The author of that report calls it, says that the ends of the beams were partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. Well, that takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel. And we've got the photos of it in our documentary that I mentioned. And this is all extraordinary evidence by officials. This is not conspiracy theorists. These are officials producing the report for the government, read by the American people, but they have no idea where the hot temperature came from. They have no idea where the sulfur came from. NIST speculates fraudulently that the sulfur must have come from gypsum board. Well, gypsum board has calcium sulfate in it. It's never turned around and attacked the steel that it's been designed to protect for the last 100 years. So no, that's a ludicrous speculation on their part.
And I think what's interesting as well, I mean, that's something that I couldn't get away from on the day that it happened, was the manner in which the buildings moved out the way. And you guys get this picture of Sideshow Bob with the way his hair is, and that's exactly what I thought at the same time. It's just, it didn't in any way look like something that was falling due to gravity. Everything was moving out the way. How much of the building actually is left at the middle?
Yeah, freely flying structural steel sections, thousands of them, obviously freely flying, forced laterally at 80 miles an hour, landing 600 feet in every direction. This is not the result of a gravitational collapse. This is enough energy to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. And by the way, this steel is all ejected outside the footprint, almost all of it. Maybe 1% of it remains in the footprint. And by the way, the 90,000 tons of concrete in each of these buildings is pulverized in midair and distributed across lower Manhattan. So the steel and the concrete, which comprise 2/3 the weight of these buildings, is not available to crush the rest of the building. And yet that's the whole theory, that this upper section crushed the lower section after softening of steel trusses. But that's not what we see. We see it blown apart. The upper section, it's destroyed in the first 4 seconds. None of the videos show it crushing the rest of the building at all. They show a series of thousands of explosions, liquefying the structure of the building, separating the columns from the beams, such that the entire building's structural steel system is completely shattered from top to bottom. And there's only a 2-story pile of miscellaneous material at the bottom.
I mean, it seems to me that you would need a scientific consensus to back up the whole narrative that this was gravitational. I mean, how many scientists, how many mathematicians, how many physicists, how many engineers, architects, or whoever put their name to the official story?
Oh, they find ways to name dozens of them, but that's about it. I mean, how many besides those dozens, maybe a dozen, who signed the final report, have actually signed a document saying we stand by the official report? There's nothing like that. Look at it this way. Well, we have 3,000 architects demanding a new investigation, and structural engineers, 100 structural engineers. It took NIST 7 years after 9/11 to produce the final report on the third worst structural failure in modern history. And yet 80,000 architects of the American Institute of Architects, of which I'm a member, not one of us got any bulletin from the AIA telling us about the collapse of this Building 7. And yet this should be the most studied collapse in history. No plane hit this building. It came down by fire. Fires never brought down another steel frame skyscraper ever before. So that's among the many problems that we as building professionals have to very seriously address. The other one, by the way, is the seismic evidence, which is NIST fraud number F in our request for correction. The seismic evidence shows that there was a seismic signal picked up 10 seconds before Building 7 collapsed. When NIST attributes the collapse of that building to the seismic signal, which happened 10 seconds earlier. So we call them on this. Their answer is, well, we think that the interior of the building collapsed first, and then the exterior. Well, there's no evidence of an interior collapse in Building 7 absent the east penthouse, which falls just into the roof just 6 seconds prior. If there was an interior gravitational collapse that was somehow happening enough to produce a seismic wave picked up 20 miles north, I think that's 30 kilometers.
We use
north.
miles here. We're miles.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh,
kilometers in Ireland.
That. You're right. That's the island phenomena.
Yeah.
So, then there would have been massive exterior perimeter deformation of the structural steel system and breaking up of granite panels and windows throughout the building prior to the overall collapse. But no, it just drops straight down uniformly. It's the perfect controlled demolition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's going to be an online event, and of course we have to do things remotely these days, but it's going to be free and open to everyone, and that's going to be next week. It's called the Justice Rising Conference. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going to be on, how to join, who's going to be speaking, what they're going to be speaking about, what are the highlights?
Yeah, this is pretty exciting. Because we have to go online for the first year ever, we're able to bring on some really incredible speakers, like James Corbett of the Corbett Report, who has done some great work on 9/11 Truth, but he's going to be focusing on surveillance on Sunday. This is happening Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the 11th, 12th, and 13th of September. We'll be bringing Matt Campbell, who will be talking about his family's plight to get a new inquest, for which we're trying very, very hard to raise the necessary funds for him and hope that everybody can contribute. We'll be talking in great detail about the request for correction and how NIST has committed fraud yet once again in their denial of our requests. It would have forced them, by the way, to completely rewrite, rethink, and redraft their initiation of collapse theory. The Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry will be talking about their latest efforts, including submittal for a grand jury petition based on the anthrax issue, which is very closely tied to 9/11. Dylan Avery, creator of Loose Change phenomena, seen now altogether over 100 million times in all of its various forms. He will be on about the new film he's creating about Dr. Leroy Halsey, who will also be here to tell some of the backstory of the creation of this scientific study, the finite analysis of Building 7, which we talked about. More than that, though, we have pioneers in the 9/11 Truth movement, David Ray Griffin, Niels Harrit, Stephen Jones. We haven't heard from two of these folks for years. So this is a very great opportunity for us to get them all together on the same platform, just reminiscing, if you will, but giving us their grandfatherly advice on how we should be proceeding and what happened during their time. Daniela Ganzer from Switzerland will be here talking about false flag operations and wars of terror as a result of 9/11 and before 9/11 as well, and more, of course, since 9/11, one of which we're experiencing right now, which is why we're online. John Whitehead from the Rutherford Institute will be talking about the advancing police state as a result of 9/11. So we're very excited about that, and we hope everybody will join us. It's all free here at AE911Truth.org. Pick up the schedule at the website there.
Okay, and you're also going to have this available on YouTube for people who might be asleep at that time, given the time differences?
Yeah, they'll be archived.
Okay. I want to talk just a little bit about Dylan Avery produced the Loose Change documentary, and I think he was only like 18 or something at the time that he made it, so it's like an amazing achievement to have done that. It was a groundbreaking documentary. It brought a different audience in to look again at the understood facts of 9/11 and reanalyze it and see, okay, this is something that the official narrative does not match with what we know. He's gone on to win awards. He's gone on to make several more documentaries, one of them which was on police brutality. He's a highly accomplished filmmaker now, and he's produced the documentary. Is it called 7? And it's about Leroy Halsey's finite element analysis done by University of Alaska. Can you tell us a little bit about the documentary, when we're going to see it as well?
Yeah, it's quite a story. Our project due diligence team of structural engineers is also filmed in that, and Roland Angle will be talking about the details of the finite element analysis. By the way, along with me, we're going to talk about the evidence. But this film is a high quality cinematic film, 45 minutes long, and it goes into detail, not boring detail, but we think it'll be a fit for everyone, not just structural engineers, to help them understand the fraud of NIST regarding their collapse initiation theory and their methodology and their secrecy and their cover-up. Because after all, they did start that final report with the stated conclusion that fire brought this building down. It was not a scientific analysis using the scientific method whereby you don't use your own political or financial agendas to filter out hypotheses that are more likely, in this case, controlled demolition, than not, in this case, fire. So he goes into some detail about the backstory, Professor Leroy Halsey does. And that's in final editing right now, and we'll expect to see that film before October 1st.
Excellent,
okay. It'll be distributed, we hope, on Netflix, Hulu, and other popular streams.
Okay, well, the important thing is that it becomes like a mainstream production, and that's the important thing, is that ordinary people who are not necessarily looking for that will get the chance to have a look again at something. It's that kind of like accidental space, that we need, not just for people who are enthusiastic and know how to go and do research, etc. I would just like to touch a little bit on the cult of misinformation. There was a kind of a mantra in the early days of 9/11 where people would say, do your own research. And unfortunately, within a short space in time, do your own research became, essentially people would try and do their own research and they would come up with no plane theories. They would, in some cases, start realizing the Earth was flat and, crazy things like that. To what extent is this cult of misinformation a result, do you think, anyway, of the lack of the erosion of trust in experts and expert institutions who have lied to us, who have sold us false science, etc.? Sorry if I don't pitch it very well.
Yeah, no, it may very well be. The fraud that we have been dealing with from all governments, including the current one, back to Obama and Bush and the media and their agencies like NIST and FEMA. I suppose that could give rise to some of the theories that are kind of running around out there on the sidelines. I mean, we've heard all kinds of different things, such as directed energy weapons, such as nuclear weapons, such as not even any planes hitting the towers, all of which we have shown to not be true for various reasons. And the most solid scientific evidence that we have that's irrefutable is the use of thermite and nanothermite incendiaries as well as high energy explosives to bring down these towers. It explains all the evidence that we have. And so I don't spend a lot of time addressing these other theories out there. But I can if you want.
No. But I mean, in your opinion, do you believe that the spread of that type of theory is in some way deliberate? It's a way of undermining because you've always maintained the pure imperialism. It's got to be scientific and rational and based purely on the understood facts. And then, of course, these theories of sorry, I'm not wording this very well, but do you believe that these are concerted campaigns to try and undermine your campaign?
It's certainly possible. I don't have any evidence to support such a speculation. Some of these people I know personally, and they don't seem to be acting out of malice or ill intent.
Essentially, I want to ask, where do we draw the distinction between truth-seeking and conspiracy theorizing? And I know that, like, conspiracy theory, okay, it's a theory about a conspiracy. Everything's a conspiracy theory. But there are narratives. You get the official narrative on one side, and then you get other people writing stories that they want to believe in on the other side. But somewhere in the middle, we're all looking for the truth. That's like the scientific method. But just, like, how would you put it? What's the difference between truth-seeking and conspiracy theorizing? What do you think?
Well, we look at facts. And let the facts lead us to the hypothesis. Let the hypothesis be tested with experiments and and background research. Conclusions are drawn, and the hypothesis that is supported by all of this is the one that advances to be tested further. It becomes theory. And so a proven theory in the case of the use of thermite and nanothermite. It's very, very careful set of evidence based on not just our own scientists who have done their studies, i.e. Niels Harrit and Stephen Jones and others who have produced this peer-reviewed, scientific peer-reviewed paper. There's another element of the science here, but by the U.S. Geological Survey, which is the one who documented all of these molten iron microspheres, previously molten iron, that are throughout the World Trade Center dust that they have no possible narrative to explain how they could have gotten there, but which thermite does explain that, and nanothermite. The nanothermite chips are not paint. They're attracted to a magnet. They produce molten iron spheres when they're put in a heater, a differential scanning calorimeter. And those molten iron spheres are the same chemical signature as the ones found by the USGS and R.J. Lee group in all the World Trade Center dust samples. So experiments corroborate each other. That's when you know you have a set of facts that you can advance into the realm of proven hypotheses and theories. And so that's, in our estimation, that level of scrutiny was not accomplished with these other theories put out there, alternative theories as to how the towers came down. They just don't hold water.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, I'll wrap things there. It's been nice talking to you, man.
Me too, David.
Well, what's next for 911Truth? And just want to get the kind of like the forward picture. You know, you got a year ahead of you of like COVID situation where it's, you know, it kind of changes the dynamic of everything that you're doing. But how much progress do you think you're going to make? It's going to be 20 years next year.
Yeah, really. We have a lot of exciting things coming up after, you know, the September 9/11 season, if you will, into next year. We've got the Attorney General being forced to submit 60 exhibits of our evidence in Manhattan and to a federal grand jury, a special grand jury in the federal court system. That will be breaking. The lawsuit that we have against the FBI will be breaking. We've been in motions to dismiss and getting past all of those and appealing various motions, and but all that should open up really to a great level, and hopefully to our success in getting this evidence into the mainstream. For instance, the FBI hid the evidence that we've given them over the years from Congress. They were required by law to present that in 2015. All the evidence they've collected since the 9/11 Commission report came out. So we know they have it because they've complimented us on one of my lectures, for instance, and they trashed another report that we gave them. So we know that they have it. They were still obligated to assess it and give it to Congress. Also, the inquest into a new investigation we expect will yield dramatic results and attract from the UK other family members who lost their loved ones once this inquest reveals that it's not fire and jet planes that brought down the towers, but explosive controlled demolition, which is very obvious in the evidence. So we've got a lot of opportunities to make it big, a big splash. We have the 5 fire commissioners in New York area city that have voted unanimously for a new investigation into all the aspects of the 9/11, not just the World Trade Center. So that was a very courageous move by this volunteer fire department. And most all of the fire departments in New York State are volunteer, and will be invited to speak at that association of volunteer firefighters at an upcoming conference. So that's on the way too. So it's all going to be unfolding. We just can't give up yet. This is a slow move with a big rock. We're pushing up a very big hill, and we can't really see where the ridge is. We just have to keep pushing. It's going to happen.